Something was living in my attic. It came a few years ago. I would wake up early in the morning to a scratching noise. It sounded like it was something brushing against the window. At first, I thought it must be the window cleaner, but when it happened again the next day, I opened my curtains to find there was no one there. I decided it must be an overgrown plant that had managed to reach my window on the second floor. I must admit that I am not the best gardener, and with school and work and life always piling up, my garden does get a little out of control sometimes. Any leaves that happen to encroach over the official boundaries, my neighbor jobs back angrily. I get it, it's kind of annoying, but not all of us have a rich husband and can afford to not work, Caroline. I went outside to look and see what needed chopping back. Like I thought, the garden was getting overgrown, but even the tallest branches couldn't reach my window. I was confused, but not concerned. Okay, so I didn't know what was causing the noise, but equally it wasn't really bothering me. It happened a few times a week, and I was usually awake already anyway. Then I began to get woken up in the middle of the night. Somewhere a bird was crying. It wasn't like any other bird that I know of. I don't know how to describe it. It was somewhere between a shriek and a screech, or a shout and a groan, like someone was shouting directly into your ear, so close you couldn't understand the words. It was loud. It pierced through the silent night like a knife through butter. I have an app on my phone for identifying bird calls, but whenever I tried to capture the sound, it fell silent. I went to the window several times expecting to see something in one of the trees that line the street, but there was no sign of an animal or that anyone else had noticed the shrieking. Once the summer ended, the noises stopped. I didn't think any more of it. Until a few months ago when it came back. This time it started scratching in the evening, and if I stood in the corner of my room, furthest from my bed, I could tell it was directly above me. Rats, I assumed. Or maybe birds. Then it began to shriek. The same noise I had heard before, only closer and quieter. As if it knew I could hear it without it having to raise its voice. It came back every night, longer and longer each time, until I could hear it scratching and shrieking randomly from dusk until dawn. I recalled that Darren, a neighbor who lived a few doors down, had a problem with birds last year. They had come in through broken vents and begun to destroy the timber and waterproof flashing. Darren had no idea they were up there until the water leaking through the roof began to grow mold on the ceiling of his daughter's bedroom. I don't do heights, so I asked Darren if he would mind going up there and checking, seeing as he knew what he would be looking for. We don't know each other that well really, but he's a nice guy and was happy to help. Darren said that if there are birds in the attic, you have to wait until they leave and then block up their entrance point, so it's best to do it in the morning when they're likely to be out catching worms, or you'll end up with dead birds. A few weeks ago, he came round, torch in hand, and armed with replacement soffit vents in case mine were broken, and climbed my rickety old stepladder up into the darkness to find out what was going on. He wasn't up there long. There was nothing up there to find. No animals, no nests, no animal poo, not rat or bird or bat. There was no evidence that anything had been living up there. He did say that one of the vents was missing completely, so he replaced it to stop anything from getting in the future. Whatever it wasn't there now, and with the vent replaced there was no way for it to get in. I gave Darren a bottle of whiskey to thank him for his time. He said he didn't really do much, but he took the bottle. That night, I crawled into bed, expecting a silent night's sleep for the first time in months. I was just beginning to slip away into sleep when my mind snapped awake again. The scratching was back. And it was moving. It was no longer by the wall, but directly above my bed. I thought about the poor creature now trapped above me. Darren had blocked up the vent. With no way out, the creature would surely starve to death. I thought about it dying. Its little body decaying above me. The flies. The maggots. The smell. The smell that would permeate the walls and fill my house with rot. In the morning, I called animal control. I'm in the UK and there are different rules for dealing with different animals. For example, gray squirrels are an invasive species and must be killed, whereas bats are protected and cannot be moved or harmed in any way. I wanted to be sure I was doing the right thing. Surprisingly, they had a cancellation and could come up the next day. That was a week ago. When he came, the animal control guy agreed with Darren. There was no evidence of animal activity in my attic. He was an older guy and called me love when he told me I probably just heard birds walking on top of the roof. I resigned myself to a life of being patronized and kept awake by scratching. But that night there was no noise. Nor the next. And the next. Animal control poking about the attic must have frightened it away. Whatever it was gone from the attic. For the past week, it has been dead quiet. No more midnight scratching or 3 a.m. shrieking. Except I'm lying in bed right now. And something is scratching at my bedroom door. The thing outside my door. It was one of my earliest memories. I must have been right around 3 years old. I remember waking up in the middle of the night crying and afraid. I cried and yelled, but my mom wouldn't come, so I hopped out of my bed to wake her. Opening my bedroom door, tears in my eyes, is when I first saw it. I was able to see out the front door from the hallway between our bedrooms. Our front door had 4 long, vertical glass panels, each about 4 inches wide. Stretched across 2 of the panels was an oddly shaped figure peering in. It's hard to say whether my later experiences have colored this early memory of mine, but I can still see this figure in my mind with such startling clarity that I don't think it unreasonable to suggest that the way I describe it to you now is the way it looked on that very night. It was not human, though it seemed to have a head, an oblique, boomerang-shaped head that spanned half the length of the door. Under its head was a body too narrow to hold the weight of its head. A flowing ribbon-like substance was draped around it, carrying an indistinguishable color that contrasted against the dull gray of its body. In hindsight, the strangest part of this exchange was my immediate comfort from the figure. My fear was gone, and I simply and easily went back to bed. My memory is more sporadic after that first night, but over the next 3 years or so I would continue to wake in the night with giddy excitement to peek at the front door for the thing I called Arrowhead. He didn't visit frequently, and sometimes it would feel like forever between sightings, and my developing brain would question whether the previous sighting was indeed just a nightmare, like my mom kept suggesting. I always told her she was wrong. Nightmares were supposed to be scary, but I was never scared when I saw Arrowhead. Things changed when I was 5 years old or so. I decided that the next time I saw Arrowhead, I would let him in the house so that my mom could see that the thing I was seeing at night was, in fact, real. I figured that he was visiting us for a reason, and standing outside the front door was its way of asking to come in. As luck would have it, Arrowhead visited shortly afterward, and I strolled downstairs in a childlike stupor to let him in. When I approached the door, I saw its eyes for the first time. On both sides of the boomerang of its head was a single, golf ball-sized black pupil, hanging abnormally still in the center of a white membrane. The best I can compare it to now is the eye of giant squid. It was the eye of something that would not seem strange if you were told beforehand that it had evolved in the abyss of the ocean, but staring at me through my front door, I remember feeling an intense horror I had never quite felt before. I ran upstairs screaming to wake up my parents, but they just would not budge. I remember shaking them and screaming in their faces until I just couldn't scream anymore. I locked myself in my room and cried until I passed out on the floor from sheer exhaustion. The years after were difficult. I started seeing a child psychotherapist who attributed the experiences to night terrors caused by pediatric sleep apnea. She explained to my parents that I would stop breathing at night when sleeping on my back, causing terrifying and disorienting hallucinations involving the visitor at our door. I maintained that what I was seeing was real, but in any case, she taught me vital coping mechanisms that I still use to this day to navigate what she would call an apneic episode. It's simple, but it goes like this. Whenever I wake up, certain of Arrowhead's presence at my door, I use cues to remind myself that I'm sleeping. It's sort of like lucid dreaming, but as a nightmare therapy. I ask myself what time it is, or try to wake up someone in the dream. If they don't wake up, I know I'm still dreaming. I know not to look for Arrowhead. I'm able to go back to sleep without issue. But I'm never actually sleeping during these episodes. It's hard to explain, but everything I've described above happens to me in a waking state. I'm convinced that these aren't actual nightmares, at least not the ones most people experience. In high school and college, sharing these stories actually won me a few friends, though none were ever convinced that I was anything other than an imaginative storyteller. More years went by. I married a woman I adore. I got my first job, and then I got a better job. I lost my dad a few years back. We were close, but we never really talked about my episodes. The whole thing made him very uncomfortable, and we never really lingered on the subject. I'm in my late 20s now and life is good. I'm married, and my wife and I are expecting our first child, a boy. We live in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Brooklyn, and like many before us, we're eager for more space and an elevator. The only problem is that I don't really want to move. Our apartment has a unique feature that I haven't seen in any other NYC apartment, a 6 by 5 foot mudroom between the front door of our apartment and the front door to our living space. My wife says that once we move, she'll miss having a dedicated space to leave our boots during winter snow. I'm going to miss having another door between me and Arrowhead. I wouldn't be writing this post if everything were normal. I know Arrowhead still visits me at night, but like I said, it's not really an issue if I don't go looking for him. The problem started shortly after my wife became pregnant. I started waking up more frequently than usual from Arrowhead's presence at the front door. Being used to the routine, I was more concerned by my lack of sleep than by any malevolence on the behalf of my visitor. Until last night. I woke up to all the familiar sensations. I was in our bedroom, but something about the room was slightly off. I could recognize the furniture and dimensions of the room, but couldn't really focus on anything in particular, as if everything in the room was in my peripheral vision. I asked myself to check the time, but I couldn't convince my body to follow through with the idea. I caught a glimpse at my wife sleeping and wondered whether she'd wake up if I screamed in her face. That's when I heard a knock. My heart sank. It was a fucking knock, and I'm certain of it. That's never happened before. The same horror I felt as a 5-year-old rushed through my chest, and I felt like balling up on the floor and crying myself to sleep again. But reason quickly overwhelmed me and inspired a more primal terror when I realized the knock I heard was too quiet to have come from the front door. It had to have come from inside the mudroom. I don't know what came over me, but I just acted without thinking. I ignored all my cues. I ran to the door of the mudroom and ripped it open to greet my old friend, but nothing was there. Nothing except the front door of the apartment standing tightly shut across 6 feet of darkness. Fluorescent light from the communal hallway of the building outlined the front door, but no light flowed through the peephole. I knew he was looking through it from the outside. I took a step forward to meet as I threw it, to invite him in and feel the warmth of our first encounter. But then I remembered those dead eyes of his. I closed the door and cued myself back to sleep. I've calmed down a bit and wanted to share my story here. I don't really have many other outlets, and I fear my closest relationships would suffer from the revelation that I am still visited at night, so I mostly keep my episodes to myself these days. I wanted to share that I have a plan for when he visits next. I've spent too long hiding behind the security and comfort of my door. With a little one along the way, I can no longer just ball up on the floor and cry. I need to discover what he wants from me and stop pretending that he's not there. I need him to move on from me and my family. Next time, I'm going to open the door, but it won't be to let him in. Next time, I will step outside with him. I don't know what to do. This is going to sound completely batshit insane. But I have to tell someone. About a week ago, I saw a jogger on my way home from work. We live in a small town with a lot of sidewalks, so it's pretty common to see joggers or people walking their dogs after dark. Sometimes they'll get creative with the lights. I've seen dog leashes strung with LEDs, people wearing headlamps. This is especially common now, in winter, when the sun sets before 5 p.m. So, I thought nothing of it. A pinprick of light, bobbing up and down the sidewalk, about 30 yards ahead of me. Just another jogger. But then I got closer, and I realized the way the light was bobbing was strange. I couldn't really put my finger on why it was strange, it just was. Something in my brain clicked, it doesn't look like it should. And then, as I passed him, my entire body froze. He had no head. I know. I couldn't be sure, I only saw him for a second. As soon as my brain registered it, he already passed. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw the bobbing light receding, but it was too dark to see whether he had a head or not. As I drove home, I struggled to find a reasonable explanation for what I'd seen. Maybe he'd been wearing a balaclava. It was pretty cold out. That would render his face nearly invisible in the darkness. Wouldn't I still see his eyes, though? Or something? Or could he have been wearing some sort of costume, some sort of mask? But why? It wasn't anywhere near Halloween. Well, whatever it was, there was no way he was actually headless. It's easy to see things. Not hallucinations, but little glitches in your brain misinterpreting reality. Like when a bit of hair falls in front of your eyes, and you think it's a shadow person for a second. Or when you see a misshapen tree stump by the road, and think it's a deer. I remember the time I convinced myself Santa was real, even though I was too old to believe, because I'd seen a shadow in the neighbor's front yard on Christmas Eve. When it was probably just a bush, or a deer, or even a piece of my hair in my peripheral vision. By the time I was at the front door, I'd completely convinced myself that it wasn't a headless jogger. I scared myself so bad tonight, I told my husband over dinner. On the way home, I saw this jogger, and I thought he didn't have a head. My husband laughed. The headless horseman trying to lose a little weight, huh? I chuckled. Maybe you'll see him at Dawn Yoga next. Doing a downward-facing dog. He took a bite of garlic bread. Or, hey, movie idea. The Headless Horseman for 2024. Ichabod Crane goes on TikTok and finds a headless fitness guru. They could call it the Headless Influencer. Oh my gosh, I laughed, rolling my eyes. But that was before things got worse. On Tuesday night, I took our dog out for a walk after work. And about halfway down the street, I saw it, a light, in the distance, bobbing up and down. I crossed to the other side of the street to get out of his way. Something felt wrong about it, though. That same sense of wrong I couldn't place when I saw the light on the headless jogger. But I continued down the street as he grew closer. And that's when Sadie started to growl. She stared at the light. Ears pinned back, teeth bared, growling. My stomach dropped. It's okay, girl, I said, but the pit in my stomach grew. I tried to walk forward, but Sadie wouldn't budge. So I stood there, phone in hand, pressed against the curb as the light got closer. And closer, and closer. Until he came into view. The jogger's pale arms swung with each step. His feet hit the pavement with a rhythmic thump, thump, thump. The light shone from something strapped to his wrist, erratically bouncing off the asphalt. Thump, thump, thump. Closer. I held my breath, staring at the spot above his shoulders. 15 feet away, now, 10. No. He had no head. It was obvious this time. Absolutely clear. There was nothing above his shoulders but thin air. Yet his body was still pumping away, his feet pounding the asphalt. I stared at him, petrified with fear, not even understanding what I was seeing. Sadie let out a snarl. Then he passed me. And I saw something else. The muscles in his exposed shoulder. In the short, smooth stump of his neck. They moved. As if he was turning to look at me. I yanked on Sadie's leash, and this time she had no problem running. We sprinted back to the house, both of us panting, terrified. As soon as I got inside, I locked every lock we had, even the deadbolt we rarely used. Stephen! I screamed. I told him what happened, tripping over my own words, blabbering, barely coherent. Not knowing what else to do, he called the police. They came over and searched the neighborhood, but they didn't find any headless jogger. Of course they didn't. The three of us packed up and went to my sister's for the night, just an hour away. I couldn't sleep at home. It was on our street. Maybe it even followed me home, knew where we lived. I knew that sounded crazy. But I had seen it, and I would swear on my own life that there was a headless man running around out there. As I stared at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep, a childhood memory popped in my head. A lesser-known Dr. Seuss story that I had loved as a kid. What was I scared of? It was called A pair of pale green pants, with nobody inside them, follows and torments the main character. It has a happy ending, of course, but the biting unease of seeing something that's so empty, that doesn't have a head or any place to put intelligence or a brain or a soul, yet is moving, acting like something sentient, stuck with me. It felt oddly similar to the feeling I had now, dialed up to 100. We spent 2 nights at my sister's place, but after that, we had to get home. The extra commute time was wearing on both of us, and my sister's 1-year-old was waking us up at night. So we headed back home, and I tried to pretend like I'd never seen the headless jogger. Maybe that was the last time I'd ever see him. It wasn't. Because at 3 a.m. that night, I woke with a start. And when I rolled over, I saw light twinkling in through the blinds. What the hell? Without thinking, I pulled up the blinds. No. My blood ran cold. I stood there, frozen, my feet stuck to the floor. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. I was face to face, or rather face to nothing, with the headless jogger. It was just standing there, 6 feet outside my window. Still as a statue. The blinds clattered shut. When I finally had the courage to peer through them, it was gone. I'm terrified. I don't know what this thing wants, or what it wants to do to me. I don't even know how it's thinking. How it's moving. I went to the police again, but no one will believe me. My husband is suggesting a vacation, just the 2 of us. He thinks I'm going crazy. I'm not. So, please, if you ever see a jogger at night, and you think for a second they don't have a head, don't brush it off as a brain glitch. I remember the day the Cartwrights moved into the apartment building across the street. It was like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Their arrival was shrouded in mystery, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses and their movements precise and deliberate. From the moment they stepped foot into the lobby, I knew there was something off about them, something otherworldly. I watched from my window as they unloaded their belongings, strange, oversized crates that seemed to emit an eerie glow in the dim light of the street lamps. Their arrival sent ripples of unease through the building, whispers of suspicion and fear echoing through the halls like a contagion. But despite the rumors and the hushed murmurs that followed in their wake, the Cartwrights remained aloof, their secrets hidden behind the impenetrable facade of their penthouse fortress. They rarely ventured outside, their movements shrouded in secrecy, their presence a constant source of unease for those of us who lived in the shadow of their looming presence. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that there was more to the Cartwrights than met the eye. I watched as strange lights flickered in the windows of their penthouse late into the night, heard whispers of bizarre experiments conducted in the dead of night, and felt the weight of their gaze bearing down on me like a leaden shroud. Then, one fateful day, the Cartwrights vanished without a trace. The building erupted into chaos, rumors swirling like a whirlwind through the halls as we grappled with the sudden disappearance of our mysterious neighbors. Some claimed they had been abducted by aliens, whisked away to the far reaches of the galaxy to unravel the mysteries of the universe. Others whispered of government conspiracies and clandestine experiments gone awry. But the truth remained elusive, hidden behind the impenetrable walls of the Cartwrights' penthouse fortress. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that unseen eyes followed my every move, lurking in the shadows just beyond the edge of my vision. And as the days stretched into months, the sense of unease that had settled over the building grew more palpable with each passing moment, a suffocating weight pressing down on us all like a vice. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon a tattered journal hidden away in the depths of the building's basement that the true horror of the Cartwrights' disappearance began to unravel before my eyes. Scribbled on its pages were cryptic passages and ominous warnings, hints of dark rituals and unspeakable horrors lurking just beyond the threshold of our reality. And as I read those words, a chill ran down my spine, and I realized with growing horror that the truth behind the Cartwrights' disappearance was far more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined. And that whatever malevolent force had claimed them was still out there, waiting patiently in the shadows for its next unsuspecting victim. The discovery of the journal sent shivers down my spine, but it also ignited a spark of curiosity within me. Despite the warnings scribbled on its pages, I couldn't resist the urge to uncover the truth behind the Cartwrights' disappearance. I knew I was treading into dangerous territory, but the need for answers outweighed my fear. Armed with the journal and a flashlight, I ventured into the abandoned penthouse, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. The once pristine rooms were now cloaked in darkness, the only sound the echo of my footsteps as I made my way deeper into the heart of the Cartwrights' lair. As I sifted through the remnants of their lives, strange artifacts, arcane symbols, and tattered scraps of paper, I began to piece together the puzzle of their existence. It soon became clear that the Cartwrights were not mere mortals but practitioners of a dark and forbidden art, dabbling in forces beyond human comprehension. But as I delved deeper into the mysteries of the penthouse, I felt a presence watching me, lurking in the shadows just beyond the edge of my vision. I brushed it off as paranoia, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by fear and uncertainty. But then, I found it, a hidden chamber concealed behind a false wall, its entrance obscured by layers of dust and debris. With trembling hands, I pushed aside the debris and stepped into the darkness beyond, my heart pounding in my chest. What I found inside was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The chamber was a twisted labyrinth of corridors and chambers, its walls adorned with grotesque symbols and macabre artwork. And in its center stood a towering monolith, its surface etched with runes of unspeakable power. As I approached the monolith, a sense of dread washed over me, a primal instinct warning me to turn back before it was too late. But I pressed on, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a desperate need to uncover the truth. And then, it happened, a deafening roar echoed through the chamber, and the walls began to tremble as the monolith came to life before my eyes. With a blinding flash of light, the chamber was engulfed in darkness, and I knew with chilling certainty that I had awakened something ancient and malevolent. In that moment, I understood the true horror of the Cartwrights' disappearance. They had become vessels for a dark and insidious force, consumed by the very power they had sought to harness. And now, that same force threatened to consume me, to drag me into the depths of madness and despair. With every fiber of my being, I fought against the darkness, clawing my way back to the surface as the walls of the chamber closed in around me. And as I emerged into the cold light of day, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. But the horrors I had witnessed in the depths of the Cartwrights' penthouse would haunt me for the rest of my days, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the threshold of our reality. And as I fled into the safety of the city streets, I knew that the true terror of the Cartwrights' disappearance had only just begun. I can't tell you the name of the place this story is about. I signed an NDA when I joined this big company I used to work at. Which means, even after everything that's happened, I can't tell you the name of the company either. Just that it manufactured heavy, industrial chemicals. I started working there about 5 years ago as a facilities manager, which basically means a glorified receptionist. I sat at the main desk in the lobby of their corporate headquarters and checked in visitors, delivery people, repairmen, etc. all day long. It was also part of my job to take care of the dozen or so vice presidents who ran the place from the 13th floor. Scheduling meetings, setting up lunches, that kind of stuff. These vice presidents, they were very busy. The kind of people who keep losing things. Watches, keys, wallets. When I found them, I kept them in a drawer in my desk until I could figure out who they belonged to. It was a small part of my job, but it was humiliating. It was stressful work, but the pay was okay and I needed the healthcare. I have a daughter, Sandra, and I'm raising her alone. She's almost grown now, but when this story takes place she was only 13. Being a single parent means that when your car breaks down and your kid has to get to school and you're late for work, you don't really have anyone to turn to. You just go to work late. This sort of thing happens enough, you get put on probation. And when you get your third strike, you get fired. Or, in my case, you get a choice. The pink slip or the night shift. Not that that's much choice. I didn't like the idea of leaving Sandra alone at night, but luckily my manager told me I could bring her to work with me. She just had to stay out of sight and not make a peep. Sandra was a pretty quiet kid, so it wasn't a problem. Sandra mostly did her homework, then slept on this little cot in the first floor storeroom. We also watched videos on my phone when no one was around. Sometimes I told her stories about the village we were from. She loved to hear those stories. I felt guilty, but I was grateful not to be in that big old 70s era building by myself at night. Sure, there was less work to do than during the day. I could take my night courses online when Sandra was sleeping. I was about halfway to getting my MBA then. It took a long time, but it was worth it. I don't know if you've ever been in an old office building at night. The kind of building where the HVAC system screams like a banshee when the furnace turns on, where the halogen lights in the dropped ceilings flicker like sinister fireflies for no reason, where there always seems to be someone lurking in the next cubicle. It isn't fun. But after a while I got used to it. And then one night I heard something in the elevator shaft. A rattling, which became a clanging. Sandra was doing her homework, sitting underneath my desk like she always did. She looked up and asked me what that sound was. I didn't know, but I smiled like everything was going to be okay. I got up and moved towards the elevator doors as the noise rose. It sounded like someone was trapped back there, trying to bang their way out. "Mom, be careful," Sandra said. I told her to get back behind the desk. Right when I got to the elevators, there was a slam behind them. I jumped back, and then the doors opened. The elevator had arrived. Everything had gone back to normal. I walked back over to Sandra, who was looking at me with concern. But she didn't seem scared at all. Kids. The rest of the night was normal. I took Sandra home at 6 a.m. She got ready, then I took her to school. When I got home and crawled into bed, I got the phone call. They had found the body of one of the vice presidents on the 13th floor. I rushed back to the office. No one would let me see the body, but I heard it was gruesome. The cops had reviewed the security footage, and they wanted to know about the elevator incident. When I told them what had happened, they thought it was pretty funny. I couldn't sleep at all when I got back home. The man who had died wasn't a good person. Like most of the senior staff, he treated me like I was disposable. But he was still a human being. That night, I told Sandra she had to stay home at night from now on. She was old enough to be by herself. I thought she'd be delighted, but she wanted to know why. When I told her, she said she wasn't frightened. I thought maybe she was a little excited. A mysterious death. A big adventure. She was staying home. I put my foot down. I thanked God later that I did. Because that first death was only the beginning. One by one they died. The vice presidents. They would stick around after hours, working on some big client presentation or whatever, and they'd be found the next day splayed on their desk, curled up in the corner of the copy room or pressed up against a boardroom window, their fists curled against the glass like they were trying to break their way out. They'd all die of asphyxiation. At first the cops thought there was a problem with the furnace, but nobody could find anything wrong with it. Then there was a matter of the dead men's skin. It had reddened, sloughed off, basically peeled away, like it had been exposed to toxic gas. I was there every night. It was terrifying. I would be too scared to leave my desk, so I'd put off going to the bathroom. Then I'd run quickly to the ladies. One night, I swore I could hear someone in the next stall, speaking loud and chuckling in a really nasty way, but when I got the courage to throw open the stall door, there was no one there. A few nights later, the elevator wasn't working, and I had to go up to the 13th floor to turn off some lights which had mysteriously turned on. You can bet I didn't want to do that. While I was coming back down the emergency stairwell, I heard the sound of dozens of feet coming down after me. I sped up, but they started coming faster, then faster and faster. I ran like hell, never looking behind me. Not once. When I got back downstairs, I shoved an extra chair in front of the stairwell door. Just to be sure. The last one was the worst of all. One night I was getting a report for a courier pickup when I saw a figure across the sea of cubicles. It was hunched over in the halogen light. It looked skinless, like it had been flayed. But it seemed to be smiling. Then all the lights went off. I screamed. Went still. Waited. I could hear the thing coming closer to me. Closer. And closer. I shut my eyes. And then the lights came back on. Slowly, I opened my eyes. And saw that I was alone. I never told anyone about the strange things I saw. They would have thought I was insane. I thought about quitting my job, but then Sandra and I would have been destitute. I was behind on the rent as it was. I had to keep going to work. I never told Sandra about any of this, but she could see the stress it was causing me. She did more than her share of chores, even cooked a bunch of the meals. I had never seen her act that adult before. I felt bad about it, but also really proud. Meanwhile, none of the authorities or the experts the company hired could find any sign of chemical spills in the building. People who worked there began to freak out. Rumors spread like wildfire. There's a fungus in the walls that kills people. There are gas pockets and vents that'll make your skin slew off. And, my favorite, it's ghosts. To understand that last rumor, you have to know something about the company I worked for. About 25 years ago, there was a big chemical spill at one of our plants in a foreign country. Killed almost 400 people who worked there or lived in the nearby town. There was a small out-of-court settlement, barely $100,000, made to survivors. The company never admitted fault. That's where the NDA comes in. I can't tell you the name of the place where the chemical spill happened. I can't even tell you the country it was in. I can tell you it was horrible. That the inside of people's throats melted off. That they coughed until they vomited blood. That they died, writhing and screaming in tremendous pain until they finally asphyxiated. Just like the vice presidents. You can see why people thought it was ghosts. The vice presidents didn't believe in ghosts. The four of them who were still alive got together in the big boardroom on the 13th floor late one evening. They put their heads together, trying to figure out who was targeting them. Was it corporate espionage? Some kind of eco-terrorist? Maybe an employee they fired? They deliberated for hours. The next morning, when their underlings came to work, they found the vice presidents in the boardroom, their skin peeled off, their eyes exploded. Their faces had claw marks from their fingernails, as if their skin had burned so bad they'd been trying to claw it off. That's when the company shut down the building. Cleaned out the corporate headquarters. Put it up for sale. The deaths stopped after that. The facilities managers had to pack up every floor. I wasn't there when this happened, but some of my coworkers were moving boxes out of an old storeroom on the 13th floor and found a bunch of paperwork that proved that the company had cheaped out on the construction of the plant where the chemical spill had happened. The vice presidents had all signed off on it. They had known that there was a high probability of a chemical spill, they just didn't care. Somehow this paperwork found its way into the hands of a young reporter in need of a scoop. Now the company's assets have been liquidated and divided between the survivors of the chemical spill. The company where I work doesn't exist anymore at all. Good thing I got my MBA. On the day before the building sale was finalized, I realized that I hadn't cleaned out my desk. I drove back over. I felt my heart rate rise as I saw the building on the horizon. My pulse was out of control as I used my security card to open the door and walk through the empty, cavernous atrium. Sweat clung to the back of my neck as I put all my stuff in the box I brought. When I finished, I was ready to run out that door for the last time. And then I realized something. None of the vice president's things had been in the desk drawer. I checked again, but there was no sign of them. I drove home slowly. I already knew the truth of what had happened, but I didn't want to admit it to myself. Sandra was still at school, so I went through her room. I found exactly what I thought I'd find. One other thing I guess I should have mentioned. The place where I'm from has this tradition. A lot of people my age don't believe it, but it's true. I know it's true. If you find something that belongs to someone you hate, you can curse them with the death they caused. It doesn't have to be a special object. Watches, keys, wallets, those all work. All the things the vice presidents lost, and that I found. And kept in my desk drawer. When Sandra came home, I'd made dinner. A traditional meal from the village we were from. She sat down. From the look on her face, I could tell she knew what was coming. Before I even said anything, she gave me a sad little smile and said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I put the food down on the table and sat. Let her speak. "I was so angry with you when you took that job," Sandra said. "Working for the company that killed so many of our relatives and neighbors. I knew you didn't have a choice, but I was still angry. Then you brought me to work that first night, and while you were in the bathroom, I went through your desk. I was just looking for a pencil sharpener, but I found their things. Suddenly, I remembered what grandmother had taught me. She didn't want you to know. Said you were too modern, too Americanized. But she taught me how to curse them. What I would need. Just a few simple herbs, and their things. When I saw what was in that drawer, I knew what I had to do. Sandra turned up her face. I could see she was crying silently. I wanted nothing more than to wipe away her tears. But I knew she wasn't done with her story. I called them up, Mom. The ghosts. I didn't know what they were going to do, but I knew it would be horrible. I knew if I prayed hard enough, they wouldn't hurt you. Did they? She looked at me, her eyes pleading. No, I said. They didn't. But you were really scared? Yes. I was really scared. Sandra hugged me. Hard. I'm so sorry, Mommy. I wish you didn't have to be so scared. But those men, they deserved it. Didn't they? She looked at me again, waiting to see if her mother would tell her she was a horrible person. They did, I said again, and wiped my daughter's tears away. You might be thinking that I shouldn't allow my daughter to get away with such a thing. Well, those men who were killed, they got away with something far worse for years and years and years. They had plenty of people, lawyers and politicians and PR specialists, to protect them. And Sandra has only me. But then, of course, Sandra can take care of herself pretty well. You might be wondering where I'm from. What kind of place has this tradition, and what you can do to ever avoid pissing off someone from there. But unfortunately you'll never know. I can't tell you the name of the place I'm from. Angela told me not to go, but when I insisted we couldn't walk away forever, she slowly nodded and said she would wait at the door while I went back in. The smell was stronger than ever now, and as I went into the bathroom, the sickly trepidation that made me want to vomit then and there was almost enough to turn me around. The door to the bathroom was still open, and I guessed that Angela hadn't taken much care to mitigate the smell by keeping the door closed like I had. I reached into the bathroom before I went in, turning on the light to keep any tricks of the light and imaginary eyeballs at bay. The masking tape was on the floor of the bathroom, like it had been torn off in one chunk, and the hole remained dark. No eyes looked back at me, and when I shined my phone light into it, I didn't see much since the hole was so small. It was just me and the burning blood smell. There's nothing here, I reassured Angela as I left the bathroom. The tape probably just didn't hold. I'm going to go back into the laundry room and try to get the door open again. She didn't move, nodding with her face still devoid of color. If she wanted to stop me, she didn't have enough air in her lungs to talk, so I walked around to the laundry room and picked up the shit I dropped when she screamed and got back to work on the door. All in all, it took me about half an hour to carve through the thick coat of paint keeping the door sealed, and I talked to Angela the whole time, trying to stay casual despite the fact that I could feel my guts trying to get out through my esophagus. Whatever dead animal had gotten into that closet, the smell was going to hit me like a fucking Mack truck, and I knew I had to be ready. The paint around the door came free, and to my disappointment and relief, it didn't just swing open and reveal its sordid secrets. I fucked with the spot where a knob would have been for a bit, poking and prodding it with a putty knife. I hadn't been speaking to Angela for a moment so I could concentrate, and I managed to make enough of a gap in the door mechanism that I could get in there with my fingers and pull on the mechanism. I was so caught up in my celebration that I had figured out how the door could open that when it came loose and opened a crack, I hadn't thought to hesitate and brace myself. The smell hit me like a tidal wave, and when I saw the mess inside I took a step back, choking and gagging. The bottom of the closet was littered with a substance I can only describe as something similar to what jerky, red and wrinkled and shiny. Curled in a corner in the back, retreating from the light of the laundry room, was a filthy and malnourished body with wide bloodshot eyes trained on me. The skin around its mouth had been eaten away, forming a feral grin. "Angela!" I screamed, and as she came running, I stopped her so she wouldn't see what was inside. "Call 911, I ordered, blocking the doorway. She turned away and I heard her speaking to an operator by the time she got to the front door. I took out my phone, trying not to retch, as my shaking hands tried to tap out one more Google search. The paperman comes to my house at night. He warns me someone will take my family away from me. The canned laughter of the sitcom roared through the living room as I sat with my wife and 2 young daughters. My wife put a thin arm around Alice's shoulder. The character on the TV made a snarky remark, and the fake laughter from the TV erupted in response. My wife and 2 daughters laughed along, but something seemed wrong. I glanced out the front window into the darkness outside. A pale face with flames in its eyes stood there, watching me with a smile like a grinning death's head. Its bleached white, hairless skin looked tight against its pointed, reptilian skull. It raised a newspaper to the window, grinning wider. Its teeth were black. They gleamed filthy and dark as tar. I continued to stare at it in horror, my family oblivious to the danger right next to them. "Entire family found dead," the headline screamed. I turned to my wife, grabbing her arm with a trembling hand. "Do you see it?" I whispered in horror, pointing. But the window was empty now. The sky outside loomed black, cloudless and flat as an abyss. "What?" she asked in a curious voice. "The sky?" I could only sit there, speechless. The headline had sent shards of ice through my blood, but I didn't know why. I felt like I had forgotten something important, but I couldn't imagine for the life of me what it was. I just felt happy to be sitting with my family, however. "No," I said, my voice fading off. "Nothing." I dug into the giant bowl of popcorn lay on the table between the 4 of us, taking a handful and shoving the delicious, buttery kernels into my mouth. A few minutes later, I got up to go to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror, expecting to see a tired, aging man standing there, lines of stress faded into his skin and gray hairs marking the passage of time. But I saw the eldritch, pale being there instead. It grinned at me, its black teeth sparkling, its eyes aflame flickering like strobe lights. They gave off a bloody, orange glow throughout the entire bathroom. "Who are you?" I whispered in horror. "What is this?" "They call me the paperman, and I bring the news, friend," it hissed through its black teeth, its grin never faltering. "And the news I bring to you is this: there are many black, faceless monsters outside coming to take your family away from you. Don't let them in. Fight them to the end, friend. They are from the pit, from the dark rivers of hell, from the underworld." "Why would I believe anything you say?" I asked, a sense of unreality still making me wonder if I would wake up at any moment from this bizarre encounter. Why would someone want to take my family away from me? "Because they heard the news, too," the pale creature gurgled. From nowhere, it pulled up the same newspaper, putting it to the mirror. It loomed larger than life there, taking up the entirety of the looking glass. I could see the headline and subtext. "Entire family found dead. A family of 4 was found dead in their home tonight, murdered." I stopped reading, ripping my eyes away. A shard of terror pierced my heart like an arrow. Was this how it happened? I thought to myself. Was this how we all died? But I can still change this, right? I asked, my voice pleading, but the paperman said nothing. Its eyes of flame glittered as his false reflection slowly faded away. Within a few moments, I was looking at my own reflection. The dead, haunted look in my eyes made me feel sick, and I had to turn away immediately. Even more disturbing, I had specks of blood across my face, but I couldn't for the life of me remember how they had gotten there. I ran scalding water from the sink and tried to clean myself, tried to scrub that filthy blood off, but it seemed to sink in like a stain. Emma and Alice had decided to set up a game of Scrabble after getting bored of watching TV for a couple hours straight. My wife sat on the couch next to them, looking at her letters. She gave me a crooked smile, her blue eyes sparkling, and then spelled out the word, killer. I frowned, looking at the board. "That's not a very good word," I whispered, looking up at her. I kept catching all of them staring at me with an odd look in their eyes, something between terror and sadness. Alice went next, using the L in killer to spell out a new word, lunatic. I kept watching the board as Emma went next, her small, wooden letters clicking together in her tiny fingers. She gave a cry of victory as she sorted her letters on the board, spelling the word, Insanity. Oh, that's double points. Emma whispered excitedly as my wife wrote down the score. I started feeling sick for some reason as I watched the words forming on the board in front of me. I grabbed my stomach, running to the bathroom. Their pale, blue eyes seemed to stalk me like spotlights. Their heads ratcheted over in a blur, following me with cold, expressionless faces. I ran out of the room, throwing up in the toilet. I heaved over and over, cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. As I rose, feeling sick and weak and lightheaded, I heard a ragged, death gasp breathing from the shower. The white curtain hung like a funeral shroud, closed and opaque. I caught the barest glimmer of a dark silhouette behind it, however. A long, twisted finger curled around the side of the shower curtain. One flaming eye of the paperman peeked around at me, half of its rotted, black teeth showing in an insane smile. "The monsters are coming," it hissed. "They're outside right now. Are you ready, killer?" "I'm no killer," I said, my blood pumping in my ears like the echo of a roaring river. "Unless I need to protect myself or my family." The paperman's fiery eyes sparkled with a sick kind of humor. It gave a laugh like the shattering of bones, drew behind the curtain and disappeared. I splashed cold water on my face before I went out and sat down again with my family. They had given up on Scrabble apparently, turning back on the TV. They sat around it, eating from a giant bowl of popcorn and sipping soda. It was another stupid comedy, but I didn't mind. I was just happy to be with my family. I sat down and took a bite of the popcorn, but it tasted strange. I spit it out into my hand and saw a pile of dead stink bugs there, mashed up and chewed. I gagged, looking down at the popcorn bowl with a growing sense of horror. It was filled with stink bugs. Most of them were dead, but some still squirmed or twisted their black legs or raised their ugly, alien faces. I could taste their rotting cilantro skunk spray on my tongue. It burned all the way down my throat. I quickly threw up everything in my stomach onto the rug of the living room, heaving over and over. Every time I looked down at the bowl of stink bugs with their long, spidery legs and disgusting, fetid odor, I wanted to start vomiting all over again. "This is the police. We have the house surrounded," an artificially amplified voice screamed over a bullhorn as I straightened up, covered in a cold layer of sweat. My stomach wouldn't stop doing flips. It felt like some kind of burning acid had filled it. I wondered if the stink bugs had poisoned me. A feeling of horror and a sense of unreality descended over me like a fog. I glanced out the window, seeing dozens of black SUVs and police cars blocking off the street. They all hid behind their vehicles with guns drawn. A SWAT team was assembling on the sidewalk, their black rifles gleaming and polished under the flickering, white streetlights. They had their entire bodies covered, making them look like giant, black bugs. In that moment, I realized that these were the monsters who had come to take my family away from me. I could see that their plastic helmets and deathly black suits were not suits at all, but the actual skins of their strange, alien bodies. They were working with the paperman to bring some horrifying, soul-shattering reality into the house. I balled up my fists, holding them to my temples as a scream ripped its way out of my lips. I looked back at my wife and 2 daughters, wondering why they were so quiet all of a sudden. I saw their 3 rotting corpses staring up at the ceiling, their sightless eyes open and eternally filled with horror. They all had bullet holes through their foreheads and looked like they had been dead for a couple days, at least. And then, in a flash, it all came back to me. I remember getting drunk. My wife wouldn't shut up. I told her to fuck off, and we had started arguing. I remember pushing her hard against the wall. She had clawed me across the cheek with her long, sharp nails. I remember punching her in the face and grabbing the shotgun, cocking it. I started screaming at her, my vision turning white with anger. Then there was a long, black spot in my memory that felt as cold and as dark as death itself. Abruptly, I remember coming back, standing over the corpses of my wife and 2 daughters. I wavered on my feet, the shotgun as heavy as a black hole in my hands. I remember bending over, retching. The memories started to run through my mind like water through a sieve, fading away into blissful nothingness. I remember as a little boy how the paperman used to bring the news to our house. I would stay in the living room in the morning, staring out the window and waiting, excited to see what had happened in the world. When I heard the newspaper slam against the front wall, I would run outside and grab it, tearing it open to read the sharp, screaming headlines. I remember being a child, running outside into the summer dawn, a small, innocent creature of hopes and dreams. All the power in the house was off, I realized abruptly as I looked up. The monsters outside must have cut off the electricity. But then a hissing of static cut through the air, and a moment later, I heard kid laughter. I turned, seeing the flickering screen of the TV. It was the only source of light in the entire house now, except for the spotlights those monsters shone in from outside. I didn't know how the TV was still running without electricity, however. The paperman's pale face loomed large on the television, his eyes aflame, withering me. He grinned up at me, as if we were sharing a private joke. "The news is in," he hissed through a mouthful of black teeth. "Now you know." I shook, my own teeth chattering uncontrollably. I didn't know what he was talking about. "We didn't get the paper yet," I said, my voice high-pitched and childish. "We're still waiting." I saw movement from the couch. My wife and 2 daughters sat there, staring at the sitcom on the TV, listening to its false kid laughter. I smiled at them. I watched my family, my circle, my heart, and my life. My 2 daughters looked up at me with pleading eyes. My wife hid her hands in her face. "Daddy, protect us from the monsters." Emma cried. "Please, Daddy, don't let them in," Alice said, her blue eyes sad and wet. I nodded grimly, racking the shotgun. I heard movement from the front yard. I glanced out the corner of the front window. There stood a line of monsters with riot shields assembling on the sidewalk, hiding behind their cars like cowards. They stood in the dark, their plasticky skins shining like demons from hell. I shoved the long, black snout of the shotgun through the glass, shattering the window with a sound like a mine snapping. I started shooting out the window, emptying all the slugs in the shotgun as I roared with an insane bloodlust. The shotgun bucked in my hands like a living creature, its explosions ringing like cannon blasts through the dark night. The monsters scattered like cockroaches under the sudden assault. Most took cover, crouching behind their cars, while a few ran behind the nearest houses. Countless pistols and rifles took aim at my house. The single, black eyes of their many barrels focused on me like pointing fingers, accusatory and relentless. Bullets smashed their way through the walls and the windows with their whining and shrieking and shattering of glass. I crouched down behind the sofa, hugging myself and shivering. I looked down at my fingers, seeing dried specks of blood under my nails. Someone shouted over the bullhorn, telling me to surrender, the man's deep voice screaming that I would be gunned down if I resisted. "Get the fuck away from my family." I shrieked toward the shattered window, hugging the shotgun tight to my body. I remembered the article the paperman had shown me, entire family found dead. Was this how it happened? The monsters outside would come in and kill us all, I decided. That is, if I gave them the chance. Just let them try. Just let them try to take my family away from me, I whispered to myself with determination. At that moment, I thought I caught a whiff of rotting flesh, an odor of feces and rancid gases. My wife's pale, bloody face looked up, and the illusion of my healthy, happy family ripped apart. I saw her eyes had nearly rotted out of her head. They had turned a filmy blue, writhing and dancing with countless maggots. "No one will ever separate us again," she whispered in a voice like the wind through a graveyard. My 2 beautiful girls looked up at me, the bullet holes in their skulls twinkling like crimson stars. The skin of their rotting faces looked loose, falling off. The whites of their eyes had turned blood red from the mutilating impact of the shotgun slugs through their foreheads. "Don't let them separate us, Daddy," they pleaded in a single voice, their bloody lips chattering, the many gaps in their milk teeth as dark and black as fallen tombstones. "Family sticks together," my wife hissed. "We will be together forever." I nodded grimly, grabbing more slugs from my pocket and slamming them into the shotgun. Waves of adrenaline coursed through my body as I mentally prepared myself for the battle ahead. I knew I must kill all the insane, faceless monsters outside who wanted to rip us apart, the demons who wanted to take my family from me.